Good morning and welcome to the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Today's date is May 1st, 2024. This meeting will come to order. We will begin with a moment of silence. Will everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Chair. Before I call the roll, Commissioner York requested to be excused, and I will mark her so. Apking.
Here.
Botana.
Here.
King. Here. Marker.
Here.
Schwartz.
Here.
Severson.
Here.
Summers. 6 present, 1 excused, 1 absent.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 5, and that's approval of minutes. In your backup material was included a copy of the meeting minutes from April 3rd, 2024 meeting. Is there any discussion regarding these meeting minutes? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
I'd make a motion that we accept the minutes as submitted.
Second.
Motion to approve minutes as presented by Commissioner Botana, second by Commissioner Schwartz. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Chair. Apking.
Aye.
Botana.
Aye.
King. Aye. Marker.
Aye.
Schwartz.
Aye.
Severson.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 7A, it's ordinance 17-24. Does the applicant have a presentation?
The city has a presentation.
Okay. Yes, please.
So, good morning, commissioners. For the record, Chad Boyko, principal planner for the city's planning division. This is ordinance 17-24. This is privately initiated, small-scale future land use map amendment. The applicant for this is Samuel V. Johnson. It's 6 parcels that are located along Pondella Road. They're just a little over 1 acre in size, cumulatively. It is within the transition area of the urban services boundary, so there is utilities that are available to the site. And then the applicant is requesting a change from a Lee County land use designation to the commercial professional future land use designation. These 6 properties were recently annexed into the city of Cape Coral. And as you guys all know, once you annex into the city of Cape Coral, you have to have the future land use and the zoning amended to match the city's designation before any development can occur on these properties. So this is the second of 3 steps in order for these to be developed within the parameters of the city of Cape Coral. So we've got a couple of maps here. The map on your left is the existing future land use map of the 6 properties and the surrounding area. To the south and then to the east, you have the properties are still within unincorporated Lee County, so they have designations that are appropriate with Lee County. To the west, across a local street, you have industrial land use, similar land use that exists to the north across Pondella with industrial land use, and then to the northeast, you have the Highland Road District land use for properties that have sort of double frontage on both Highland Road and Pondella Road. And then the map on the left, or map on the right, is the proposed land use, which would designate the 6 properties as commercial professional. Just really quickly, brief summary of what commercial professional allows. It states that it has a maximum floor area ratio of 1. The maximum commercial square footage for these properties, if they were developed, to their maximum extent, would be a little over 43,000 square foot of commercial development, and there are no residential units allowed within the CP designation. We analyzed the comp plan requests according to a couple of comp plan elements, policies. The first one was the commercial node section, which is policy 1.13 of the future land use element. This seeks to locate commercial development at or along commercial nodes, which are the intersection of 4 or more lane streets. Staff finds that the site is not directly located at any commercial intersection. However, the site is just a little to the west of the Pondella Road and Hancock Creek South intersection. Pondella Road is listed as an arterial roadway, so it meets that commercial intersection criteria. The policy does state that even though a property may not be located directly at an intersection, the nodes can extend outward with continuous commercial designation. Staff finds that the Pine Island Road District, along with some industrial land use, extends out from that designation, and so therefore staff finds that the site does qualify for being located as an extension of a commercial node. The next policy that we looked at is our commercial siting guidelines. There are 8 of these guidelines that we look to see if a site is adequate or suited for commercial development. Staff finds after analysis that the site is consistent with 2 of the guidelines, which are major intersection and compactness. Major intersection kind of goes along with the commercial node criteria, being that it's near that intersection of Pondella Road and Hancock Creek South intersection. And then compactness, these are pretty standard rectangular lots. Staff finds that the site is not consistent with 2 of the guidelines, which is intrusion and integration. And staff finds that the site is partially consistent with 4 guidelines, which is ownership pattern. All 6 lots are owned by the same owner. Assembly kind of goes along with, you've got a couple of properties that all have one owner. It's a small scale assemblage, adequate depth, and then access. This policy does not require a proposed amendment to meet or not meet any sort of threshold of guidelines for approval. It's really more of a recommendation tool and a policy guideline to help staff and city council determine if the site is adequate for commercial development. So through our analysis of the Cape Road Comprehensive Plan and the future land use element, the Plan Division staff recommends approval of the request to amend the site to the CP future land use designation. I'm here for any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Warco. Madam City Clerk, how are we going to handle the citizens' input? Am I just going to open it up in here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We'll go ahead. This is a public hearing, so we'll open up to citizens' input. If there's any members of the audience wishing to speak, please identify yourself.
Diego Villatoro, this is my mother, Consuelo Villatoro. We live on
It's okay.
Pine Lake Drive.
I received this letter también.
Estaba preguntando si tiene algún pregunta sobre So basically your plans is permission so that you guys can make a commercial construction in that area? It's where the woods are, right? I assume so?
So
Yes.
if you want to make comment during public comment, you can make your comments and then we'll discuss as a commission, and then we can also include the city and the city attorney to help answer any questions that you may have.
Or
Is that basically the comment?
that was just a question. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll turn it back to the commission at this point. Yes.
Hi, my name is Linda Miller. I'm Vice President of Avalon Engineering, and I'm representing the property owner on this future land use map amendment. As Chad mentioned, he did a wonderful presentation this morning. I don't want to go over every factor that he put in his presentation, but these parcels were annexed into the city, and they have an intensive development future land use in Lee County. So we looked at this and said, what is the best land use for adjacent neighborhood? We don't want industrial uses next to the neighborhood. And Pine Island Road land use is really, this property doesn't have a connection to Pine Island Road. We're separated by Pondella. So we looked at the commercial professional land use. The commercial professional land use has the same buffer requirement as the commercial corridor does, or the Pine Island Road land use, to separate and buffer from the neighbors, which is 20 feet without a wall or 10 feet with a wall and a buffer hedge and plantings. So we looked at it for that way, and we analyzed that according to the 5 standards that are required in the city's land use and development code, along with the comprehensive plan. So I stand by to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for the comments. Are there any other members of the audience wishing to speak? Seeing none, we'll close citizens' input. I'll turn it over to the commission for comments, and then also if we could possibly involve the city regarding the question that we received from the audience, which is whether this property was going to be slated for commercial development, I believe was the question. That would be-
Okay, so the land use is for commercial professional designation. We mentioned earlier that it's not a residential land use classification. It would allow for one of two zoning districts to be approved with this, which is either the commercial district or the office district. You could do a PUD as well for this, and it would qualify for that since it does meet the minimum 1 acre size. The county, and then there's an additional property on the other side of Pine Lake Drive that abuts a single-family house. Actually, it abuts 2 single-family homes.
But the new designation moving this property onto the Cape, there's no ability to build residential homes on this new property. It can
Not
only
with
be used
not
for
with
commercial.
not with the proposed designation that's been asked for.
So the existing designation, you could build houses there?
Not currently, because the property has been annexed in the city of Cape Coral, so you can't have it has a Lee County land use currently.
Right.
You cannot have a Lee County land use and be in this Cape Coral and develop in that fashion.
Moving it now that it's been moved to Cape Coral, could it be designated for residential?
If the applicant so requested, which they have not.
Do we have any idea what their intention is for the property?
They have not indicated to us, it's not a requirement that we ask them. They applied for the commercial professional land use, and we review it according to what they ask.
I was just wondering what the citizens' concern, what is their main concern, that they'll be taking, it looks like trees and growth away, or that they're too close to their house or residence?
From my understanding, the question was whether it was going to be a commercial development versus a residential, more single-family homes or multifamily homes. And the answer would be that given the zoning change that the applicant, the landowner, has requested, it would be some sort of commercial development. So whether that be office space or some other commercial use, as opposed to a residential use. We'll open it back up, yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, you guys wouldn't know like the company that's gonna do the construction. So if let's say they're doing the construction, they close off the roads, you guys wouldn't know that?
And we wouldn't have that information. So this is very early on in the process.
Right.
So they have to go through this process, and then they'll start putting forward site plans and more detailed information regarding what's going to be there, how the construction will work. Okay. Thank you. And we apologize. This is an unconventional meeting. Typically, we're in council chambers and it's much more orderly, so we appreciate your understanding. Thank you. All right, I'll continue, open up to the commission. Are there any other comments by the commissioners?
So all these names at the end are residents that will be affected, or that it's within a certain range?
Yes, our code requires that we send notices out to all residents within 500 feet of the properties.
That's why I just want to repeat, because it's for each property, right? So
The-
the names on these lists are the same names over and over again.
It
Six
could,
times.
yeah, it just depends on what the parcel records are. If you have a couple of different owners, when we actually do the mailings, we just send to one. But if what you're seeing is just the list of when we do our search of the surrounding owners. But when we actually do the mailing, then we just send one letter to them. We don't, send them 15 letters.
Additional comments from the commission?
My only concern would be, and it's probably comes at another step, but is if they propose to try to close off that road, it makes it very inconvenient for the citizens that are living down that street in the center. So I would assume that wouldn't be allowed.
Actually,
Well, I mean, that's not even a City of Cape Coral roadway, that's a Lee County roadway, so it wouldn't even be in the city's jurisdiction to close that off or to do anything along those lines.
Can I just add to that?
Please.
So there are two separate developments, even though they're adjacent to each other and we're asking for the same land use. The development will occur on the parcels that are separated by the roadway. So we will not be seeking to vacate any portions of the roadway and putting the parcels together. There'll be two
So you
separate
do know what kind of properties you're intending to develop?
It's probably like a little flex space units, I mean conveniently to Pondella. That's how we kind of see it as a flex space. Office area in the front, little garage area to pull your trucks in, services, providing services right there in Pondella. With nice buffering, with, you know, wall off areas for buffering. That's how we see that.
And I think to ease the concerns of the citizens here, so if your concern was that they were going to close off that road, combine those two parcels together and then build something there, that would be a completely separate process. So they'd have to go through a vacation process, vacating the property from the city and taking over that. And that, of course, would be open to public hearing again, and you would have time to deliberate and let the city know your concern regarding that process. Okay.
Yeah. Commissioner,
Yes.
it's not a city roadway, so the applicant could not even apply to file for a vacation process. We have no jurisdiction over that roadway other than making, you know, if we had to possibly make some improvements with Lee County's approval, but there's no way that it can be vacated through the city.
If they wanted to vacate that road, they would have to go to the county. essentially.
Correct.
Same
Yes.
process through the county as opposed to the city. Thank you. Commissioners, any comments?
No further.
Do we have any motions?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion to approve by approve ordinance 17-24 made by Commissioner Atkin and a second by Commissioner Schwartz. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Chair. Apking.
Aye.
Botana.
Aye.
King. Marker.
Aye.
Schwartz.
Aye.
Severson.
Aye.
Summers.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you. All right, moving forward, item 7B, ordinance 30-24. Does the city have a presentation on this?
We do not have a formal presentation, Commissioner, but I am prepared to give a brief summary on this. For the record, Mike Strivey, Planning Team Coordinator with the Planning Division. Ordinance 3024 proposes changes to Article 7 of the Land Development Code, which is our sign regulations. And in particular, this ordinance before you proposes new regulations regarding temporary signs. And one of the key features here is that it states that temporary signs are prohibited on property in the city unless the person placing the sign has written permission from the property owner or from the person managing the property, like a leasee. In addition to that, this particular ordinance establishes penalties for violations, and it also identifies the Cape Coral Police Department and the Code Compliance Division as the entities responsible for administering these particular provisions in our code. And I'll stand by in case you have questions.
Thank you. This is a city public meeting. We'll open up to the public. If there's any members of the public that wish to speak, please state your name for the record. Seeing none, we'll close citizens input. I'll open up to the commission.
So would this affect realtor signs, like for open house, garage sale signs, political signs? Is that what we're talking about here with this, with the temporary sign thing?
It would definitely affect political signs. I believe realtor signs. I'm looking at our assistant city attorney here and whether or not real estate signs.
Like if you're having an open house and you stick 7 signs through the median down the block, is code enforcement going to come by and cite these guys, or?
This ordinance is prohibiting temporary signs in the right-of-way without written permission, and it's enforceable through the city's code process.
Right.
Do you mind, Chair?
Yeah, please.
Did you draft this? Were you part of it?
I did not,
Yeah.
no.
So this is, if I understand correctly, we had this discussion during the last election cycle, that's what brought it forth. And it was, I believe, Councilwoman Tate had brought it forth, and then she left, and so it kind of landed in my lap. The intent originally was motivated by the proliferation of political signs that had, went all in the medians and everything else, and we didn't have, or we found that there wasn't a enforceable component that the city had that would allow us to go in right away and remove them.
Right.
And so the idea, the genesis of this was that we would allow and be afforded the opportunity to do that. Now, at the time when we had public hearings, a gentleman, president, I believe, of the Gulf Coast or Palm Coast Realtors Association had came forward and said, hey, this becomes an issue with us because that signs are our business.
Right.
And so I had said, well, not to mention it would be resource intensive from the city clerk's perspective if we made it an affirmative action that was required prior to the placement of signs that you had to check in. So at that point in time, I said, well, why don't we just make it upon request that we could do that, so that if there was a problematic sign that we thought might have been placed without the permission of the property owner, that we are via ordinance granted the ability to request written approval, and if they don't have it, then that becomes an enforceable action. I don't know whether that is actually how it materialized and was drafted, but it was supposed to be that sure, it's a violation, but it's only actionable if we decide to say, hey, you need to provide us confirmation that you actually have a written approval from the property owner to place it there, and if you don't, then it becomes a fine.
Well, I don't see that as a problem if it's the realtor signing your yard and you're trying to sell a house for them. They've obviously given you permission to put it there. You may have to have a little written letter or something, but the signs for the open houses down the street on public property, and I live on a Placo Grande, so there's a median, and there's always signs for open houses and so forth stuck in that median so that you know which way to go to get to the side streets. And I think this would be problematic unless the city...
Could we exclude that? Could we exclude temporary real estate signs?
There are some challenges in terms of regulating signs based on content. And that's why you see this category of signs identified as temporary signs and not political signs, or real estate signs, because of a Supreme Court case that was ruled on in 2015 that largely placed restrictions on how local governments can regulate signs based on their content.
When I get putting your personal sign on private property that you don't have permission for, it shouldn't be allowed. I get that, but I look at it, if it's actually going to affect somebody's income and somebody's way of earning money, which this seems to do, then it's a problem. Because real estate is a very big industry in this city, and if we take away their means to guide people to their sites,
But
does
they
that
wouldn't-
negatively affect you?
Yeah.
But you could get permission from the city, correct?
From the owner, from
Well,
Okay, what if it's a
the
city's
median
property?
in the middle of the street, the owner is the
just
city, I assume.
those signs would be prohibited in the right of way. We don't want those signs in the right of way.
Currently prohibited as well.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's already an ordinance.
And it must not be enforceable because you see them.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at. It's not enforceable.
So I think the overall theme here is that the ordinance seemed overly broad, because it is going to encompass these temporary real estate signs, garage sale signs,
Construction signs.
construction signs. So this is going to create, and then an enforceability. I mean, as far as is code going to run around and constantly pick up these signs, and then go through the fine process, it seems concerning. And then as far as the selective enforcement, where the city would not have the affirmative requirement to go out and remove all of these, but could select the ones that they want to go out and remove, sounds concerning as well, because if somebody, if you want to go to the
They're gonna be
political realm, if
discriminatory.
only this political candidate signs are being removed, it seems to open the door for issue. I have concerns regarding the entire drafting of this, unless a city attorney has some sort of explanation regarding the overbroad application.
Well, I think as far as characterizing it as overbroad is just reflective of this is what we're able to do with regulating these. Time, place, and manner. Content, no way. So we buy ugly houses placed in every median. That's the same as open house, take a left-hand turn at the next street.
So,
So
could
we
we-
can't carve anyone out, so the, calling it over broad, it has to be broad. It cannot be narrow.
Can we put a time limit on the
Time
signs? 24 hours?
Time, place, and manner restrictions, that avoids any kind of content-based issues.
Could we say a 6-hour, this would encompass open houses and things of that nature, garage sales? Would there be ability, you cannot post a sign on another individual's property without permission for a period longer than 6 hours?
Sure, I think there's probably a number of ways to go about doing it. I think ultimately you're gonna run into the same kind of enforcement issues. I gotta start my clock on the 6 hours. And,
6 hours.
the other thing I would note is, excuse me, I'm
Please go
sorry.
ahead.
The other thing I would note is just in general, code enforcement is reactive, not proactive. So they respond to calls. There's a state law that says the complainant has to give their name and identifying information. So as far as any sort of selective or discriminatory enforcement, any concerns that you have about that exist today with the rest of our code.
With everything.
Yeah.
If you got a boat in the driveway here and a boat in the driveway there, it could be perceived that people don't like to look at that boat, but this one is a 32-foot, contender, and you're not gonna bother with it, but the John boat, that's just natural in how you perceive it. I understand your point. This candidate signs are good, but this guy's on, but
I think that.
you could stretch that to any part of any code in the entire city.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to whether or not there's a, above board code enforcement department.
I think that weighs even more heavy on the issue that we could have if candidates, constituent decided to go around and say, hey, call code enforcement on all the opponent signs, if you will. I think there's just a lot of issues, and the evil here of having signs in places that maybe they shouldn't be is outweighed by the evil of the additional restriction and possibility of abuse and additional issues that you're going to see with open houses. Drive down Cape Coral Parkway, look at Pelican, you're going to have 20 open house signs there every Saturday. It's going to cause serious issues. So those are my comments.
I think the main problem is, what this all goes back to, is the political signs are the problem. The clutter, and this always comes up every 2 years. And it's always worse, of course, in the presidential election when you see even more intent with everything else that's going on. The question is, how do you keep it clean? Because it's a mess. And you look at some of these lots that may have 30 or 40 freaking signs on them. But I think if you go back to where the private property is, that's where all the problems come up over the years, where these signs have come up and come in. How do you regulate? Difficult. What do you say to the person that has these 20 or 30 signs on there? Do you really want these on there? After a point, when you get that many signs on a particular area, it becomes mute because you can't even see half of what's going on. It's just clutter. So how do you regulate that? It's difficult. I just don't know. But if you put something like this into effect, is it going to do any good? Questionable. The question, the main point is, where do we go from here? What do we do?
Well, and I understand especially the last election cycle, there was a lot of political sign issues that happened, so I could see how that would spur this. But I just, like the commissioner said, I just think there's a lot of negative effects that come from it that outweigh the positive effects from it.
I tend to agree, and I think creating another ordinance that's not going to be enforceable for all intents and purposes is wasting a lot of people's time. So I wouldn't be in favor of it.
Can I get some clarification? Just on, so what we're saying is that for city or government-owned lots would be prohibited from sign placement under this provision. Is that correct?
It is now. Is what they
It is now. So if that's in fact the case, then why in the last election when we were going to the library to vote, then there were political signs everywhere?
I think to Commissioner Long's point is because we didn't have an ordinance like the one in front of you that says the police department and code enforcement can come and take action and have real teeth to it.
So that's the differentiation on this ordinance that basically says now the onus is on the law enforcement to to basically
Well,
pull those
empowers.
signs.
Or code.
If I
Councilman
could
Malone.
share, yeah, no, that's a good point, and it's a separate provision here, and the right of way, the city right of ways is different than the conversation that we've already been having. But yeah, there was no teeth to it, and I think one of the problems was the individuals that would put them in the middle of the right of way and all the way along the medians. The way that it previously worked was, it was laughable. We would take them as the city and we would hold them, we would call the individuals and say, hey, we've got them. They'd come pick them back up and go run right out and do it. There was no fines or anything associated with it. So it wasn't even a, hey, you at least forfeit the sign, because the signs aren't cheap.
Right.
So it was just this constant cat and mouse. It was a waste of resources in the city. And you know, we would say, hey, come get it. There'd be sometimes 70 to 100 signs.
Right.
They'd come pick them up and go right back and do it again because there was no enforcement. There was no penalty. There wasn't even a slap on the wrist.
They probably try to get a better place then.
Yeah, so that's what subsection 3, I think, is it makes it very clear and concise that it's a violation, it's immediate, subject to immediate removal and enhanced civil penalties.
But if I might, just, so then for private citizens, in order for a sign to be placed on their plot, they have to have the permission of the citizen that owns the lot, correct, or owns the place, which is kind of what we have now, I thought. No? I mean, you could go, I could go stick my sign on a neighbor's yard and,
Well, private property is private property, but as far as us being able to request it without the action being on the property owner themselves. So you've got, for example, and I know that it's time, place, and manner restricted, we can't really focus on one, but keeping with political, you've got individuals that there's vacant commercial sites all over the place, and the
Right.
owners are absent, they're in other countries. And so you get the guys putting the 4x4 signs up,
Right.
unbeknownst to the property owner. Property owner doesn't really know to be able to make that action on their own, to say, hey, they need to get this out of my yard. And the city, hey, that's private property, we can't touch it.
right,
So now through this, we can say, hey, can you please provide us information that shows that you've got written approval? And
Yeah.
if not, then I understand the city can take action. Another sort of component of that. And that's with anything. I mean, any business, commercial businesses or anything, there's no recourse. I mean, the property owner does find out, you take it off, but that's it.
My only input on that would be, you know, as a candidate, if you see the opponent's sign on a public place, you're feeling obliged to go get your sign there as well. And so that there's some type of balance and presentation. To me, campaign signs are all clutter anyways, you know, because you see them at the beginning and then pretty much you just clue them out. So it becomes, for the campaigns, a huge time sink. And so I don't see that. The only thing I do see that if we were trying to restrict this from personal property would become a freedom of speech issue. So that would definitely be something we want to stay away from.
It looks like with certain subtitles in here, all we're trying to do is focus in on to give the police some kind of legal action to take for these medians, and that is where the clutter has been for the last several elections. And they're all helpless to do anything. And like Keith said, they just come right back and put them back where they come from. So if you're looking at for a subtitle to control something right now, I think that's what the main focus is. And I understand all the other concerns about private property and things like that, but if there's no ability to enforce the mess that we've had on the medians for the last several election cycles, then it's going to continue. So I guess that's the way I'm looking at it. It's just a subtitle.
But
of
if we
control.
put something bad in place, it's just gonna make it worse, not better. If we put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, it's, and it seems like the big focus is political signs.
It is.
But there's so many other trades that are gonna be negatively affected by it.
Well,
That's my concern.
it's the medians, I think, is the main thing. But I don't think there's been any real focus from code enforcement on the real estate industry. It's just kind of a new.
No, and like you
Yeah.
said, they're reactive, not
Right.
active. They don't go actively hunting, they have to be called to go out
Yeah,
and
so
hunt.
I think it's gonna stand the way it is right now. I mean, I'm not in the real estate business, but I'm looking at what's been enforced over the last few years and what could be based on a complaint. I don't think anybody really complains about the real estate part of it. It's the political situation, but you have to have something with teeth in it to go after it, and that's basically what the city's looking for.
So my question would be to Councilmember Long. Was the purpose of this, you were part of the creation of this, and when this was discussed at council, was the purpose to exclude and do away with political signs on public property?
No,
That's
it's
the
any
idea.
signs. when we can't specifically target any particular.
I'm sorry,
But
signs.
low-hanging fruit, you know,
On-
this conversation has been primarily revolved around political signs because it's low-hanging fruit, but
Yep.
it's larger than that. Think about after the hurricane, how many roofing signs did you see in the middle of the medians, all over the place? I mean, you couldn't even keep up with them. So, I mean, it's cyclical, it's whatever the flavor of the season is, and so that's sort of the genesis of it is the signs. Sure, at that point in time, that politics was lively because it was around that time of the election. But
Sure.
depending on the season, it could be anything.
So the common theme that I keep hearing is medians.
Mhm.
So in this ordinance,
Right of way.
that goes after private property as well. So, and that seems a little bit, that's the overbroad portion that I'd be looking at, in my opinion. And I think that it does create additional issues. It's a sloppy way to go about remedying that particular issue. And maybe looking at this and redrafting this in a way that would more selectively go after what we're actually looking to go after, which appears to be the public right-of-ways and medians.
Chairman, I'd just like to ask the planning division, did you look at what other communities are doing? Because everyone has this, you know, especially the political, I would think all the cities around us and around the country have faced this. Did you look and see what other places do to address this situation?
We were not directly or intimately involved in actually crafting this ordinance, so we were not asked to check with other communities.
I wonder if we
To
could-
my-
This
to my
is a city
knowledge-
council motivated thing. It's a political
Okay.
vendetta.
Yeah, oh, well,
Code compliance staff may have, but I don't know that for a fact.
it just seems that since this problem is not, you know, just for Cape Coral, it's for everywhere, that someone else has looked at this problem and come up with something.
Well, I do know that the city of Punta Gorda has some very restrictive regulations on their signs, and especially when it comes to open house realtor type of signs, that's what their focus was on. I will note, you know, just I was not intimately involved with the drafting of this, but it doesn't seem to me that this is targeting political signs. This is if you have a sign that's promoting anything at all, and it's on someone else's property, then you have to have permission. That's the gist of it. So it's basically, and that's only where someone has contacted code enforcement with a report.
Right.
I mean, I guess an example in my mind would be where the realtor takes 50 open house signs and puts them in the right of way of 20th Avenue. Here's where the house is, right? They put 50 temporary signs up on the right of way. They don't have permission. They're not going to have permission of all those folks, probably. But that's what the inquiry would be in that type of a compliance investigation.
So I think that the commission understands that. I think that's understood, but the practicality of how it operates, every Saturday, you're gonna see hundreds of them around the city of Cape Coral. There's not gonna be 50 of them leading to a house. There's gonna be 5 of them, and they're gonna be on the corners, and they're gonna point somebody in a direction towards a home. Whether it's 50 or 5 under this ordinance, it's still subject to removal by the city. And in my opinion, I don't think that's something that's beneficial in order to, beneficial enough to have as a side effect for remedying the issue of having signs in the medians.
Well, I mean, you guys, just to kind of play devil's advocate, you guys are kind of tailoring towards defending the rights of the real estate community. I guess,
Business
to
owners
advertise.
in general.
Well, where do we stop then in that, if you go that same direction? I mean, are we gonna allow people to have signs every 30 feet on Pine Island Road saying there's a barber shop up here for people that need to know where to get a haircut? I mean, where do you draw the line to say, well, it's okay for these guys to show us, 3 different streets about how to get to an open house? What provides them that particular special privilege among any other businesses? A lot of business owners would love the opportunity to say, hey, come this way, to come, send your kids to Happy's to play on a bounce house because it's on a back street, not on Pine Island Road. Where do we draw those parallels to say it's okay for the real estate community to do that? Which is why we're not in favor of this, but any other businesses, we couldn't say no. I mean, we would have to say yes. So then again, we would be compounding the issue to go that far in the other direction and opening up the gates to say, hey, come this way if you want a hot dog, or whatever.
I think that,
and again, that's an extreme, but just to kind of flush it out.
what this ties into is a discussion that we were having earlier regarding the time. So things that are temporary. So there's going to be some sort of event at J.C. Park, signs going to pointing down to J.C. Park from Del Prado, the temporary nature. If you have a restaurant, you're always there. So you're always going to have those signs out, and having those signs out and for extended periods of time continuously would be the issue. I think it's the temporary nature, and that was the time component that I think that I was touching on to see if there was a way that we could utilize the time restriction to make it where it has less of a negative impact on the signs that I don't think too many people are concerned with. And I think it all ties back to the temporary nature of
And would it
those.
also affect the city, because the city posts temporary signs all the time? Or would the city give themselves permission to post the signs, but not give regular citizens or businesses the permission to post the signs? I mean, constantly events are hanging banners over the overpass, so when you're driving under Del Prado, there's the banners hanging and whatnot.
Except for the
Are
city attorney.
they affected as well? Well, anybody in that section that wants to answer is fine.
Yeah, I mean, I defer to Mike on this one, but I mean, it's tough to deal with certain hypotheticals. I mean,
I agree.
but there are certainly, the city does special events that are permitted special events. Certain rights and privileges are associated with those authorizations, including signage. That's outside the scope of what we're talking about
So
today.
then, in this case, would then we have to make an avenue for professionals that want to post temporary signs to go to the city, get permission, and create more bureaucracy that way? And I'm not trying to be a jerk, I'm just trying to get to the
Oh, no,
bottom.
I don't
Yeah.
take it that way at all.
Thank you.
No. I mean, I think this is, to me, my understanding is this is an enforcement tool, right? So that if there is an issue, something can be done about it. I'm certainly hearing and understanding your concerns. I mean, everything sounds reasonable to me, one way or the other. It's legal. You guys are the recommenders and decision makers over here. You know, as far as trying to come up with some language that would preserve the rights of a realtor to put up open house signs from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on the weekends or something, or whatever, you know, then there's your time restriction that might carve something out where, you know, it wouldn't be limited to open house signs, but it would be anybody who wants to put a temporary sign out, you got to pick them up by 5 o'clock or whatever.
But the con of that is then we have to have enforcement to control for signs to see if they've been picked up, and that also seems problematic.
Especially because the way that this is written, it is to accommodate signs of a temporary nature that are more of a,
Nuisance.
you know,
Can we instead
a
just ban
monthly or
politicians?
month to month. I mean, there's definitely other ways to run things, but I think our Republican democracy is doing pretty well for us. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very difficult subject, right? Communities across the country, not just us, have run into it. It's very difficult. How do you regulate these? If you look at the preamble to our sign code, it talks very much about aesthetics, safety. You want to make sure that you've got clear pedestrian access, visibility triangles at the intersections. So that's really the express stated purpose and intent of this sign code. So there has been some suggestion or determination that all of these signs that proliferate all over the place are a blight. Our sign code is a vehicle to regulate the aesthetics when it comes to these type of signs. So this is, again, I wasn't intimately involved in the drafting of it. I definitely, see some of the, maybe issues that you've identified where there may be some effects on people where it's not intended. I don't know that it's really just solely intended. I mean, I drive past the "We Buy Ugly Houses" signs all the time. Those guys are not getting elected to public office. So I didn't really read this as geared toward political signs, but I do know that those have been an issue in the past in the city and in every city, really.
Well, here's an example right now. anything that's within what we call the line of sight, when you have a median, 50 feet back from the edge where the turn is, can be removed at any time if there's a sign there. That's the fact of right now. But the problematic is where the signs are down the center of the median itself. So, but we still you'll see the real estate signs that are on the edge, which are actually illegal because of the line of sight. The only reason I know that is because I'm involved in the medians and I know most of the regulations. So if you don't have any bite that you can do anything about, it's going to be a repetitive situation. Is it selective? You can look at it both ways, but if there's nothing in there, and I understand what the concerns are for going across businesses, but I think you have to file a complaint with the code enforcement, but they have to have some kind of bite to be able to enforce what you're trying to get rid of. And it's a very fine line, I agree. But the question is where we go. Go ahead.
Summers.
A thought that would protect small businesses would be that allowable period of 6 to 8 hours. If the sign's longer than that, it's not that temporary, and that will stop the "We Buy Ugly Houses" and the roofers bandit signs, while allowing the realtor, the mortgage broker, the yard sale people. They have 6 to 8 hours to put their sign out and pick it up at the end of the day. And that way it's not there overnight. It's not the same reoccurring signs. It's not political signs going everywhere, because those guys won't go out there, pick them up the end of the day and bring them back next morning. I think that can solve a lot of problems and protect everybody.
Kind of like with the food carts. How they have to move now at night and come back in the morning. That's temporary.
Yeah.
But then what about, what then about the political? Because I think
Well,
you're coming up to a season that's where the complaints.
If you want signs in your front yard, you can give them permission.
I get that,
So if,
but I'm talking city property.
well, the city give them permission, or they don't give permission anyway, so the city can remove them. And if it's there for more than 6 or 8 hours, it's violating this ordinance anyway.
Okay, so the 6 to 8 hours on private, and like someone said, the owner lives, 6 states away or whatever, what about that property?
It's private, you can't put it on without permission.
I know, but
But that's what they do, the political guys, they line the vacant lots with them.
that's what I'm saying. So his temporary wouldn't work because there's no one that is giving or taking.
Well, the political signs would just be taken. The code enforcement would just come by and take them the next day.
To be
That's
clarified,
basically what.
to clarify, the 6 to 8 hour period would apply to private property. You still can't place your signs in the median. It would be private property. It would be a carve out to this requirement to ask for permission to have a temporary sign on someone's property. That would be a carve out on this, and it would be a time restriction for this. If you were to extend past that 8 hours, you would need to have authorization by the property owner, and it would fall back to basically the same mechanisms, enforcement mechanisms that are in this ordinance as it's written today.
So on these vacant lots that are owned by someone who doesn't live here and probably might not care, you'd call the city and complain about all these signs. They would then have to say, well, that's owned by so-and-so. I mean,
And this is
it just
another
seems
issue.
like a little.
This is another issue with enforcement is obviously before you remove the sign, you have to contact the property owner, is that correct?
I think under this, they're putting the onus on the person that's putting the sign up, right? So it's the,
Okay.
whatever is advertised on the sign, going to
Contact
them
that
saying,
individual.
let's see your
Show me your
permission,
permission.
please.
Okay. So that's how they would operate.
I would just reemphasize that if we're gonna, if you're talking about certain hours, then that's, if I put a candidate sign in my personal front yard, that means I have to pick it up at 8 p.m.
So
because all signs are gonna have to follow those rules.
that wouldn't be, so the time would allow for a carve out for other individuals to put signs on property as we currently do, call it the open house signs. If it was past that period of time, then it would be on the onus of whoever put that sign in the property to prove that they had the right given from the property owner to put that sign there. And if it's the property owner that put the sign there, then that would be a clear, easy, yes, I own the property and I put that sign there. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, so we've got temporary permanent signs and temporary signs.
Yeah.
It's-
Right.
Well, does it become a free speech thing, like Commissioner Summers said, if it's in the yard and we're making them remove it? Is that a free speech thing violation as well? I mean, how messy does this get, the deeper we get
It's
into it?
already
I mean, the general bright line rule on this stuff is anything that we do has to be content neutral, and we can only regulate based on time, manner, and location.
Right, so it's not specific to any one, it's general broad across.
Correct. And there's classes taught in law school that are just all arcane Supreme Court cases that are all First Amendment signage. And you're right. Whenever you put something like this in a place, you're gonna have people that test it, and they're going to start calling and enforcing and taking things to the limit. That's my personal opinion. That's what I've seen in the past.
I think it's fair. I think we've had a fair amount of discussion regarding this, and I think that the city has at least been made aware of a lot of the concerns if they weren't already aware. At this time, I'd ask for a motion regarding this ordinance 30-24.
I'll motion to decline.
Second.
Motion to decline transmission of ordinance 30-24 made by Commissioner Schwartz, a second by Commissioner Sommers. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Excuse me, I have a
Yep.
question.
Yep.
It's a negative motion, so if you want to pass it, vote no?
You would vote in favor of non-transmittal of this to council, is essentially.
I
the
vote
motion.
No,
maybe
but
I
I'm,
You want to vote for it, then you would, yes, then we would open it back up. If this motion fails, we'll open up a new motion.
okay,
She's
I
not know how
thought,
to vote. So if the motion is to deny, then an affirmative vote would be to deny.
okay, I
So
thought
if you
you
were in
couldn't
support of
even
it, you
make
would say
a,
no, and then a new motion would be
uh,
created.
in Robert's Rules of Order, if that matters, you can't even make a negative. You would say, I want to pass this, and then everybody vote no, or, but anyway.
So it's
Just
essentially,
saying, this
so-
is so
and just-
complicated.
And I think I agree with you. I think it's probably just more semantics than anything else. But the role of this board is to make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. And it may have been stated a different way, but what I'm hearing is the recommendation is to deny this ordinance. So if you're in support of denying the ordinance, then you would
Says right
vote
here,
in
deny,
favor of the motion.
Approve or deny.
Yes, sir.
So we'll reread that for clarification. So there was a motion made by Commissioner Schwartz to deny this ordinance, second by Commissioner Sommers. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Hapking,
Nay.
okay. Spotana,
Aye.
King,
No,
Marker,
Aye.
Schwartz,
Aye.
Severson.
So let me get this clear. So the aye is to deny.
Correct.
Aye is to deny. Aye.
Summers,
Aye.
5 ayes, 2 nays, motion carried.
Thank you. And I think as just additional commentary, which I'm sure the city is well aware of at this point, I think the sentiment of the commission was not to say that this is not something that we would be opposed to in the future, simply that maybe attempting to carve it out in a more narrow
If it's
way,
possible.
if possible, while still abiding by the First Amendment constitutional rights.
or we're just kicking this can down the road. Someone again will bring up
The
this.
council may pass it anyway.
Okay.
I know they will.
Moving on to the next agenda item, item 7C. This is ordinance 32-24, and I believe the city has a presentation.
Yes, Commissioner Marco, again for the record, Mike Struby, planning team coordinator with the planning division. This particular ordinance proposes rules that would govern the screening and placement of permanent generators in the front yard of single-family residences. So the purpose is to develop regulations not for allowing permanent generators. That's already been decided, and I'm going to go give you some background on how that determination came about. This would be to better protect the integrity of single-family neighborhoods by imposing what we think are some reasonable rules regarding the placement and screening should someone choose to put a generator in the front yard. Last year, we had an applicant that appealed a decision by Building Division staff that denied the placement of a generator in the front yard of a single-family home. And we were asked, planning staff was asked to evaluate that appeal. We recommended that the decision be affirmed. We read the code and we thought it was reasonably clear that generators are not allowed in front of houses. And ultimately, those types of appeals are administrative, and our interim director at the time reviewed the applicant's appeal and reviewed our recommendation and ultimately did side with the applicant in that case. So the implications of that from that point forward is that generators, unless the city takes steps to prohibit those generators in front yards of single-family homes, those types of equipment are allowed. And furthermore, since we didn't have any screening or location requirements for those generators, staff did not want those types of equipment to be located on single-family homes without some protective measures in place. And that's why we're discussing this issue with you here today, to recommend some regulations that would provide some screening and make sure that those generators are located away from the street right away. So some of the key provisions here, generators in the front yard or in front of generators in the front yard or in front of a single-family house must be screened under these provisions from the street and from an abutting residential property by an enclosure. And we have regulations here that specify what that enclosure is to be made of, height, and so on. So those regulations would include a maximum height of 6 feet unless additional height was required to adequately screen the generator. Secondly, the enclosure is to be composed of materials consistent with the single-family home or the building. Third, the enclosure is to be painted to match the color of the building, so we want these enclosures, to the extent that they are permitted, to blend in with the surrounding single-family home on the site in which they're located. Fourth, the enclosure must comply with minimum setbacks for the zoning district. By far, the two most prevalent zoning districts in which single-family homes are allowed are the RML zoning district and of course the R1 zoning district. Both have front setbacks of 25 feet. So this means that the enclosures could be located no closer than 25 feet from the front property line. And then lastly, the enclosure could not be used for storing any other items or for screening any other equipment. The enclosure is to be used only for housing, if you will, the permanent generator. These provisions, I want to emphasize here, do not apply to temporary generators that people typically store in their garages and roll out onto their driveways during periods of power outages. There are also a couple of related changes that have been made by staff. Section 415 in the Land Development Code has been revised to include a cross-reference to this new subsection of the Land Development Code. And then, in addition to that, also contained in Section 415 is Table 415, and changes are made to this table to better clarify some of our requirements when it comes to the placement of equipment on residential sites. And one of those key provisions in terms of making our regulations more clear is you'll notice that some of our abbreviated terms have been eliminated. You'll see that in cross-through language, and we've actually written out what we intend to apply there, like either not applicable or not allowed. So staff is recommending approval of this particular ordinance. We've received no correspondence concerning these proposed rules, and of course I'm available if you have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Drury. This is a public meeting. If any members of the public wish to speak, please state your name for the record. Seeing none, I'll close citizens' input. I'll turn it over to the commission. Do we have any comments by the commissioner? Commissioner Severson?
A couple questions. Number one, on the appeals process, what was the marked deviation that was approved? So there was a current ordinance that said you can't put them in the front yard. And so on the appeal, the adjunct judge or whoever did the administrative action basically said, well, that's not really what the ordinance says. Am I making sense on this? So what was it that caused the variation from our previous policy?
I think there was in the applicant, in the appellant's case, there was some doubt as to what our table actually required, or in this case, allowed. So if you look at the table on page 2, I believe, one of the things that caused a little bit of confusion was, you'll notice this is down near the bottom of this table, other mechanical equipment, AC, generator, and pool equipment. There's been some strike-throughs here because we're recommending some changes, but originally it said NA. We had always interpreted that to mean not allowed because we've never, in my knowledge, never allowed generators in the front yard of single-family homes since I've been here, and I've worked here since 2006.
Right.
The builder looked at this and thought, oh, I think this means it's not applicable,
Right.
that you do allow it in the front yard.
Yeah.
And furthermore, I'm putting that generator close to my house, and it's going to be not going to be infringing on the 25-foot setback. That was sort of a minor. That was more of a minor issue. We just said it doesn't matter how far back it is from the property line. It's not allowed. Period. Our director looked at this. I don't want to try to attempt to get inside his head as to what he thought in terms of allowing the generator in the front yard, but I can only imagine that he thought that there was enough, perhaps, ambiguity here that he ruled in favor of the appellant. So this is an attempt here, one, to clarify these regulations, where perhaps they weren't as clear as they should have been, and then secondly, in our view, to require some reasonable restrictions in terms of screening and where those generators can be placed. And I do want to mention one thing too. This is not a request, even when we explained to people that previously that generators were not allowed in the front yard of single-family homes, that we were bombarded with.
Yeah,
This happens very rarely. This happens on just a small segment of the homes that we permit, typically homes on water, large homes on relatively small sites, 10,000 square foot properties, where the house essentially is constructed from side property line to property line, and then after the design is completed, the homeowner says, oh, I need a generator. You know, remember that hurricane we had a couple years ago? But now I don't have room for it. So that's sort of how this came about. I don't see this as something that most home owners would take advantage of. Some of it is a little bit self-selecting because those generators are pretty costly. If you've checked prices on those recently. But nevertheless, for those situations where someone chooses to put a generator on their site and they can't put it on the side, and they want it in the front because they feel they absolutely have to need it, we think these regulations will help better protect those surrounding property owners in those residential areas.
Yeah, that was my follow-up question, is how many of these do you actually get?
Not very many.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Have we given any thought to the size of the structure that we're gonna have to build to house the generator? Generator's gonna have to be 18 inches off the back wall, plus it's gonna need 3 feet of clearance in front of it to pass the National Electric Code so we can operate and work on it clearly. It's gonna need clearances on both sides of it. So it's gonna wind up being a fairly big structure we're gonna be forced to build with a wall in front of people's homes. Where in the past, because I don't know, I've probably done 5 or 6 generators in the front of houses in the city of Cape Coral over the last decade. We've always just put a plant barrier in front of it to hide it from the street. The regulation has always been, as long as the generator didn't protrude past the front of the house. Because, you know, because most houses, the garage stick out, the house is set back a little bit, so we can put it in front of the house as long as it doesn't protrude past the garage. So we've been able to do that in the past. I think to build this structure in front of somebody's house is going to be more invasive than a generator. I mean, a generator is 26 inches high, 4 feet wide on a little pad. And most of them now you can get color matched to your house. So to have to build this giant structure seems a little over the top. Or can we either restrict how much distance we need on the side of the house to put a generator? Because right now you need 9.5 feet from the house to the property line to fit a standard generator so it falls into the setbacks. Can we build them up higher? Can we put them on platforms? If we have the lack of space on the side of the house, can we go up instead of out? Is that possible?
I don't know, I think that's probably an engineering question. I'm not an engineer. In terms of them being more conspicuous without an enclosure, I understand your perspective. That's not really a thought that's shared by planning staff. We think that these enclosures will do a better job of concealing this equipment, particularly when they're painted. You'll notice here on subsection 3, we say that the generator shall be located at a distance not to exceed 5 feet from the front of the building unless a greater distance is required by the Florida Building Code. So you've got to get a building permit for this enclosure. That may dictate to some extent how big that enclosure has to be to provide for adequate circulation. And a lot of that goes back to how big your generator is going to be in the first place. The other point that I would make too is that on commercial sites, we do not allow HVAC equipment to be visible from the street right away. We require it to be screened. If that is our standard for commercial property, we certainly don't want a lesser standard for a residential neighborhood where this equipment would be even more conspicuous. So that's sort of the thought process here. I appreciate your comments, and you know, there's areas I think here where you can look at this a little differently, of course, but that's sort of how we approached it.
And the cost factor. And you mentioned generators are expensive. Generator, and if you're putting a 500-gallon propane tank in your front yard, you're going to spend between $20,000 and $25,000. Now you're going to spend another $6,000 to build this enclosure. All of a sudden, your generator is $31,000.
You can always just put it on the side yard, as you identified earlier, and there's no screening requirement.
But
And
it
there's
doesn't
no
fit.
enclosure
It
requirement.
doesn't fit. Most of the houses that are being built nowadays are so big on the Cape that there's not enough room on the side of the house to put the generator. It won't fit, so we can't put it there.
I think in many cases, not all cases, but I think in many cases, this is a design issue. Because these are getting permitted before building plans are being approved for that single-family house. So there's adjustments in many cases that can be made. You got to work with your property. You can't build right on top of someone's property line, and likewise, you've got to make allowances for some of this equipment. So that's sort of how we're approaching this.
No, and I get that, and I completely understand. There has to be allowances. We have to give the people the ability to put in this equipment. Obviously, we just went through that horrible hurricane, and having a generator is a lifesaver. But I think we also have to be kind of practical about what we have to build to encase this. And it's just, my opinion.
Okay, yeah.
Rest of it.
Thank you. Do you have any other comments from the commissioners? Do you have a motion?
Got a motion to approve.
Motion to.
Second.
Second. Motion to approve ordinance 32-24 made by Commissioner Atkin, second by Commissioner Botana. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Atkin,
Aye.
Botana,
Aye.
King,
Aye.
Marker,
Aye.
Schwartz,
Nay.
Severson,
Aye.
Summers,
Aye.
6 ayes, 1 nay, motion carried.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7D, this is ordinance 33-24. I believe the city has an additional presentation.
We do, Commissioner Marker.
Thank you.
Okay. This is another proposed change to our land development code that our city manager asked us to bring forward. And this involves single-family homes and duplexes that become legal nonconformities because of comprehensive plan amendments generally initiated by the city and not the property owner. That result in a single-family home and site becoming non-conforming. So a lot of this is the result of the city's need and desire to increase our mixed use and commercial land base. And so we're always looking for opportunities to do that, particularly at key intersections. And so many times we'll go in and we'll recommend changing the land use generally from a residential land use to a commercial or mixed use land use for several blocks. And as much as we try to avoid sites that are already developed with single family homes, invariably there's some that are caught up in the land use change. And so then those single family homes and duplexes become non-conforming, and that can be problematic. The key standards that we are proposing to be relaxed in this instance include parking, solid waste, landscaping, and off-site improvements. So this would be for those sites that have single-family homes and duplexes. The owner then decides perhaps that he wants to redevelop the site to be consistent with the existing zoning and future land use classification. A small commercial property, that can be very difficult to meet many of our commercial requirements when the site was originally developed residentially. This is intended to give that property owner greater flexibility. So in terms of who would benefit from this, all owners with property with a single-family home or duplex, that becomes a nonconformity, again resulting from a comp plan amendment, which the owner did not initiate. That's a key. There are also a couple of categories here that specify who is not eligible for this relief, and that would be owners that acquired the site after the adoption of a comprehensive plan amendment are not eligible for relief under this provision. So the comp plan amendment is made when Mr. Smith owns the property. He then sells to Mr. Jones. Mr. Smith would be eligible for flexibility under this provision, but subsequent owners like Mr. Jones would not. And then lastly, also not eligible for this type of flexibility that I'll get into in a moment would be any owner of a site that chooses to demolish a non-conforming single-family home or duplex would not be eligible for relief under this section. They could redevelop the site, but in conformance with our applicable sections of the Land Development Code. So the key provisions here in terms of trying to encourage redevelopment of some of these non-conforming sites. Parking, we propose to relax parking standards. We would require a minimum of 3 spaces for these types of properties. Generally, parking is assessed based on your building area, and many of our uses are assessed at a minimum of 1 space for 300 square feet. So even a relatively small house, 1,500 square feet, would require generally somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 parking spaces. Secondly, solid waste provisions. Generally, a dumpster in an accompanying enclosure is required. That requirement we're proposing to waive. Third is landscaping, and we're proposing that landscape buffers not be required along property lines adjacent to residential zone sites. However, we are recommending that landscaping be required in the form of a row of trees and also a row of shrubs to provide for some adequate buffering and protection of those adjacent residential properties. The main thing that is being eliminated from this landscaping provision is the actual width of the buffer itself, which may range in a lot of cases anywhere from 10 to 20 feet. And in fact, for many residential houses or structures that are constructed on our 2-lot platted sites, often they're built to roughly 7.5 feet from the side property line, which is the setback, so they can't physically accommodate that buffer unless you're doing something like either doing some significant alteration to the structure, you totally redevelop the site, or you request some type of landscaping deviation, which generally would require a public hearing. And then lastly, we're suggesting that some flexibility be considered in regards to required off-site improvements, and in particular, off-site improvements along local streets and alleys. Those requirements may be waived by the director, and there are some standards there that are contained in this ordinance that would give the director some guidance in terms of identifying which situations that flexibility might be appropriate. We think there are several advantages to this particular change to our code that we are recommending to you today. One, we think it'll encourage the elimination of legal nonconformities and encourage the redevelopment of commercial sites by allowing the existing buildings to stay on the site. It'll encourage redevelopment on sites that are currently served by city services. These regulations, we think, clarify city regulations, will simplify and streamline permitting, and that will help to reduce redevelopment costs. And then lastly, while we're talking about providing flexibility for redeveloping these particular sites, we also believe that there are adequate safeguards still in place to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. We're recommending approval of this ordinance. We have received no correspondence concerning this particular code change, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Struby. This is a public meeting. If any members of the audience wish to speak, please state your name for the record and identify yourselves. Seeing none, we'll close citizens' input. Open discussion to the commission. Do you have any comments from the commissioners? So, Mr. True, I do have a question regarding the ownership. So these benefits are only available to owners who currently own the property. If they sold the property at any time, that subsequent owner would not be entitled to any of these benefits.
If they sold the property after the future land use amendment had been adopted,
Okay.
the future owners would not be eligible to enjoy these benefits or this flexibility.
Okay. And it appears to me that this ordinance was put in place in order to alleviate, to an extent, a burden that the city had put on the property owners. Is that a fair statement?
I think I would characterize it a little bit differently, but Yes, I think you could think of it that way, yes.
Okay. And I agree, we've seen this with, when we did the rewrite of the comprehensive plan, rewrite of the LDC. It created a lot of issues with these non-conforming and mismatched properties. Now those properties are worth less to be sold, they can't be financed. Traditionally, if they're going to be sold as a duplex, they can't be refinanced and money pulled out of them. It's created a lot of hardship on these owners. And I think that this ordinance, which is a step in the right direction to remedy those issues, would only really benefit a really small portion of property owners that have the ability, know-how, and desire to develop a property themselves, as opposed to being able to say, hey, I have a property, city placed a burden on me, this ordinance was created to alleviate that burden, and I can sell that property to a subsequent owner who actually is a developer, who can achieve those, or utilize those benefits that have been imparted on the property. So I think that it's to restrict it to the current owner. I'd just like to see the reasoning behind that, if the city has an explanation for that.
We just think that after the owner sells or conveys the property to someone else, that particular person, as part of their due diligence, should be fully aware of what they're buying already if they're checking what the zoning and the land use is. I might add too that obviously not everyone is looking to redevelop their property commercially for people that have these single family homes, and then there's a land use change and then a subsequent zoning change. And for those people that continue to want to keep and use their house as a single family home as long as they're the owner when the land use change was made, we treat that single family home as a legal conforming residential property. So we allow people to expand in those cases. If it's destroyed by a hurricane, since we consider it a conforming use, they can go ahead and rebuild too. So I just wanted to point that out too, because not everyone's going to be looking to redevelop these sites commercially. But I wanted you to be aware of what protections were in place for those people that want to continue to use those as single family homes or duplexes for that matter.
And as a city, we had this issue come up the last several years, multiple times. And most of the time, it's the property owner looking to refinance a property or sell a property to an individual that's seeking financing. And the underwriters for the mortgage are denying mortgages because they have incompatible land use and zoning. Is that still an issue that we're seeing?
We're just aware of it, I think, sort of like you are anecdotally. We do hear those stories too. We acknowledge there may be problems with financing or getting insurance. None of these proposed changes, to my knowledge, would really directly address that, unfortunately.
Okay.
It's something that's sort of beyond our ability to mitigate or to assist with.
And to your knowledge, is there anything that would restrict this ordinance from being drafted in a way that would allow for one subsequent sale? So to allow the current property owner to have a subsequent sale to somebody who would be a developer and reap some of the benefits that are imparted by this ordinance?
So yes, I think that would be a relatively code change. If that's something you would want to recommend, we could just make it this flexibility available to all future owners of the property, and not just restrict it to the owner at the time the future land use change was made.
Perfect. City Attorney, would you see any issues with that? Just overview of kind of heading in that direction. Do you see any issues regarding the legalities of that?
I think it makes it more straightforward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
So
Commissioner Summers.
Yeah, it would make it much more, it'd make the properties more sensible if the next person would have those, that loosened restrictions, the properties would be more marketable, be less of a hardship on the current owner. So someone would buy that house or duplex, make it a commercial property, and then maybe, assemble other properties around there to make it more usable. I think that makes a lot more sense.
Commissioner Stevenson?
I was just going to ask, so does that come in the form of an amendment to this proposal then, or would it go back to the rewriters and then brought before the planning and zoning again at a later date?
I believe it would feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, it'd be, we would deny this and we'd make a recommendation to redraft it in a way that reflects the ongoing nature of the changes.
I think, I'm hesitating to say something before voting does, but I think you could make a motion to approve this with that change.
Right.
And
That'd
then
make
we
it
could
more clear.
redraft this between now and when this goes to council. That's, I think, what.
Yeah, and I was gonna say it's really at the discretion of this board,
Okay.
which way to do it. Either way is viable.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Yeah, from a timing perspective, that would be a lot better. I mean, even to the point of the first discussion, if you guys wanted to, could do it now, say, hey, we would approve it if, or
Yeah,
impose
so
conditions, because all we get is, if you say no, we just get, no, we don't get any benefit of this
It's
unless
gonna bounce back.
your liaison, who is usually Mr. Welsh, conveys, hey, by the way, just some context. If we don't have that, all we see is a line item on paper, yes or no.
Right.
So if you guys said yes if or no but, you know, we would like to see if council did move forward this language. That goes a long way
Yeah.
in helping us.
And I would say there's probably the way to go. Is there any other discussion regarding the ordinance and the idea of transmitting it with a recommendation? Seeing none, would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve with an amendment that we change to the restriction to the previous owner to all owners
Okay.
moving forward.
And we'll go slower with this. So a motion to approve ordinance 33-24 with a recommendation to make the benefits of this ordinance carry forward in perpetuity with the property. Made by Commissioner Apke, and do I have a second? Second by Commissioner Botano. Madam City Clerk, will you call the roll?
Apking,
Aye.
Botana,
Aye.
King,
Aye.
Marker,
Aye.
Schwartz,
Aye.
Severson,
Aye.
Summers.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Yep, thank you. All right, we're gonna move on to item 7E, and that's ordinance 34-24.
Yeah, 70, right?
That's too fast.
Yeah.
Okay. Do not believe we have a city, or do we have a presentation from the city on this?
Yes.
Fantastic. Go right ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Candace Ford, Associate Planner with the City Planning Division. I will be talking to you about ordinance 34-24 today. So this is going to be a proposed section to our LDC, section 5.4.8, specifically talking about our seawalls. So the reason of this proposed change is to allow all city-owned properties, or in which the city is going to be the applicant for these particular properties, with 85 linear feet or more of water frontage on a saltwater water body, the opportunity to either construct a seawall bulkhead or a form of an alternative shoreline stabilization. It would be up to the discretion of the Public Works Director and their staff to certify that it would be appropriate for that area. This would allow the city to have more suited or find solutions for best suited shorelines for those areas, and it would minimize the destruction of some of the natural ecosystems in those areas. And this would include, of course, with 85 linear feet of frontage or more. Anything less than that is not included in this provision, just to provide continuity for shoreline stabilization methods in relation to the adjacent properties. And then this is the actual language for the code. I put it up here. So it's going to have 85 feet or more of frontage, shall be allowed to construct or utilize either a seawall bulkhead or an alternative shoreline stabilization along the frontage exposed to contact with the water. And the proposed plan shall be reviewed and approved by the Public Works Director for any bulkhead or alternative shoreline stabilization. This would not exclude us from getting any other permits from local or state or federal agencies. We would still have to get those before we could go forward with this. So these are kind of the highlighted parcels in the city that this would impact. We do have about 36 parcels currently that are on saltwater water bodies, 30 of which are going to have that 85 linear feet of shoreline or more. And then we do have some comprehensive plan that this would kind of pertain to, and it's going to talk more to the natural shoreline stabilization and kind of minimizing and restoring natural hydrology to the area. And then policy 2.1.3 kind of talks about there's a goal that is not to destroy or damage coastal natural resources. So that's what this would kind of also be minimizing as well. Planning staff is recommending approval of this, and we did not receive any correspondence.
Thank you. This is a public meeting. If any members of the public wish to speak, please state your full name for the record. Seeing none, close citizen input, open to the commission. Are there any comments from the commissioners?
I'm a little slow, so I guess I'm not completely understanding your, are we proposing that we can either do seawalls or an alternate form, like the land going down? And
Yes.
we're proposing this for saltwater canals as well as
Sure.
freshwater canals?
Yes, that is correct.
Any additional comments by the commission? Do we have a motion?
I motion to deny.
Motion by Commissioner Schwartz to deny ordinance 34-24. Do we have a second? We do not have a second for a motion to deny, so the motion fails. Do we have another motion?
I'd motion to approve.
Motion to approve ordinance 34-24 made by Commissioner Botana. Do we have a second?
I'll second it, and then can we have a discussion?
That's,
We would open for discussion now.
Yeah, let's,
Yep.
discussion now.
We would open for discussion now, yes,
Okay.
before we submit the.
Okay, I guess I'd like to ask Commissioner Schwartz why do you think this is a bad idea?
If I lived on a saltwater canal, I would want all my neighbors to have the same seawall situation that we have. I would not want the body of water going all the way down the canal like that. I think it takes away from the property and the property value.
So this is going to impact city-owned properties with 85 linear feet or shoreline or more.
Only city-owned properties?
City-owned properties, or in which the city would be the applicant. So most single-family lots are going to be 80 by 120, so there's typically only 80 linear feet of shoreline, and ours is 85. So it's going to exclude most single-family areas from this.
And further, you notice that this only applies to properties with 85 feet or width or greater. So any property that the city owns, that's like a 2-lot platted site that's less than 85 feet of width, we want that to be seawalled for that exact
that's
same
the
reason. So
clarification
there's
I
a
was looking
clean
for.
transition, even from that city-owned property that's relatively small to that neighboring residential property.
Perfect, thank you. Told you I was a little slow.
Commissioner Severson.
So, as it was being presented, I got the impression that there is a incentive for the city to buy up waterfront property here. Is that not, okay, that must have just been my misunderstanding. I just didn't want us to get in a situation where we got, government taking over land that should be private.
I
Okay.
think this is better, this is intended to provide the city with more flexibility in managing some of our larger properties with considerable shoreline.
Okay.
Still having to go through local and state and any federal requirements that might be in place regarding shoreline stabilization and protection.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other discussion? We have a pending motion for approval right now made by Commissioner Botana. We do not have a second. Is there any additional?
I second it.
A second. We do have a second. Second by Commissioner King. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Hapke,
aye.
Botana,
Aye.
King,
Aye.
Marker,
Aye.
Schwartz,
Aye.
Severson,
Aye.
Summers.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7F, ordinance 35-24. City have a presentation?
We do not. This is actually a super easy ordinance for you. This is the water supply work plan, and our comp plan is a date that the water supply work plan was approved 5 years ago by the City of Cape Coral and the South Florida Water Management District. It essentially lays out what's going to happen with utilities projects throughout the city. In our comprehensive plan, in the infrastructure element, we put the date that it was approved by the Water Management District and also the City of Cape Coral. They have approved a new one that was just recently approved in March of 2024. And this is essentially a housekeeping update to reflect the recently approved water supply work plan. The reason that we have to make this change rather than leaving it as the approval from 2019 is that the Water Management District requires that you update your comp plan with this date change in order to qualify for potentially a few $1 million of grant approval. So this is really a simple housekeeping change to update that newly approved plan. It does not change any substantive language within the comp plan or anything like that. This is just more of a housekeeping measure that is done in order to make sure that we can keep trying to get some grant funding from the Water Management District.
Thank you. This is a public meeting. Any members of the public wishing to speak, please state your full name for the record. Seeing none, we'll close citizens' input. I'll open up the commission. Do we have any comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
I'd move that we approve.
Second.
Motion to approve ordinance 35-24 made by Commissioner Botana, a second by Commissioner Schwartz. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Apke,
Aye.
Botana,
Aye.
King,
Aye.
Marker,
Aye.
Schwartz,
Aye.
Severson,
Aye.
Summers.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you. All right, moving right along. Item 8, citizens' input. This is a public meeting. If any members of the public wish to speak, please make yourself